But what I think is so exciting about your series is that you are drawing on those, the mythology of China. And like dragons are sort of a perennial and evergreen, like kids love dragons, but we always see that kind of European style of dragon.
Yeah.
That's just so exciting already. And also, and this is the thing, when it comes to talking about inclusion and representation in kids books generally, but I think specifically in series fiction, it's like there's this sort of untapped richness. Like there's so much to sort of play with and enjoy.
So Danny Chung is quite special because I hadn't seen like any British Chinese boys as main characters or on the cover of books. So actually, like having all these books like just makes me feel good.
Like getting her voice, being in her head made me realize how much of me is in her. Yeah. And how semi-autobiographical it is in terms of the identity issues she has, being a child of two cultures and not quite fitting in either one. So she can code switch, but there's not one that she can really call home, and sort of the issues that springs up.
Yeah. Younger series fiction they make readers, right? This is where they are sort of building up their reading muscle. And for middle grade and YA, if we don't hook them young, you're not going to have them at that age range. So, giving some love to series is really important.
This is where we hook readers. At this point, kids are coming off of phonics schemes. They've learned to read. They've got this superpower. I mean, reading is a superpower, right? So you want to give them quality fiction to read at that age to hook them and to create, readers for life. So I'm very passionate about this age group having quality fiction. I think when my son started reading, and it wasn't that long ago, he delved into it, the more we found other stuff like, Mr. Gum and Barry Loser, and it's really funny, brilliant texts that he was enjoying reading on his own. I guess that's why I'm passionate about it, because I feel really strongly that this is an age group that misses out sometimes on really good quality texts, and this is where we need to sort of fill the gap, really. If you're thinking of making a career of writing, you also have to work collaboratively often in this age group with a publisher. So, I mean, I wouldn't be able to put food on the table if I just relied on myself to come up with ideas, because it would just take too long. So I'm always looking for different projects as well. You kind of have to leave space for a bit of both, I think.
The reason why I became a writer in the first place was because I wanted to kind of be a solution to the problem identified, which was finding books with better representation, books that she could see herself represented in. And I was struggling back in the picture book stage. And that's kind of one of the reasons why I started writing. And I wanted to be able to continue that for her. And it came about from needing to diversify and deciding I wanted to do the writing full time, but knowing I needed to do lots of things, because if I did rely on my ability to generate ideas, oh dear, like my daughter was fairy mad. And I'd never seen a fairy book that looked with the main character that looked like her. So I was super excited immediately.
I liked with Tiger Warrior, there's lots of fantasy in America, like Asian American fantasy. And I like that this was kind of a British-based British Chinese fantasy, but that has elements of mythology and the Chinese zodiac. But Jack's like a normal kid, he's a gamer. With the age group, that it can be a 9-year-old that can read Danny Chung, but then in that same class there's a 9-year-old that can't read Danny Chung and they can read Tiger Warrior.
The sort of first books I started to write were on series fiction, so it was some of those Beast Quest books. And I think what I love about writing on series, especially in collaboration with other people, is it feels like you're almost on a writing course, but you're kind of getting paid to do it as well. Like series fiction definitely has its place in terms of the long-term career of a writer. It can be integral to a career, and it's certainly integral to a reader's development.
When you came to me about this panel, I knew it would be to do with diversity as well in series fiction. And I saw the question about books that influences me as a child, and honestly I couldn't pick one, but I read loads, and I would say 99% of those books were characters who were white. And subconsciously, as I was writing books, I brought that with me in a way. Like maybe it felt like, you know, it was should be only white characters, or that brown characters didn't belong in books, or something. Like somewhere in my brain I'd made those weird connections, and I suppose in some way I'd reconciled that brown characters didn't really have a place in children's books. But then when it came to writing books, I felt uncomfortable to write white characters because that's not my lived experience, which is possibly why I fell into animals. Because you know, parts of my culture drift in, and you know, if you read any of the Dave Pigeon books, or you know, sort of any of my books, part of my culture always comes into it, and we have, like, you know, pigeons who enjoy biryanis and things like that. I think there's a lot of responsibility on people who are of colour in publishing to put characters of colour, but sometimes it's not a natural place your brain goes if that was not your point of reference as a child. Sometimes whilst you mean well and you want to do the right thing for people of colour, if that's not what your truth is and you're not sure how to do that, I don't think as an author of colour you should feel the pressure to write characters you're not really sure about.
I think there is something about seeing yourself properly and it almost giving you the permission to yourself to do that. I think sometimes there is this pressure when you're a writer of colour, oh, you must write a certain type of book, and if that might be coming externally, but sometimes that can be an internal thing as well. It's like, oh, you know, I should have. So, you know, I love that you write about pigeons. Like that needs to be part of the narrative as well, because we're not a monolith, are we? Any sort of opportunities or challenges about being a writer of colour in this industry right now? Anyone feel like speaking to that?
I'll speak on it a little bit. I mean, it's been a whirlwind, especially with Onyeka. And that's the first book that's really encapsulated my culture and my cultural background, both being British and Nigerian. And I have felt the pressure. I felt like being a bit under a microscope. Also, I think it's that pressure of feeling like you speak for your whole community, as opposed to this is my experience, this is my viewpoint, it's just me. And so it's always having to remind myself that no, I'm not. And I can only really write from my experience and how I think on things. And I think I also felt a lot of pressure to get it right, to be perfect. Like, I don't feel I have the luxury to be mediocre, or to even sort of like, I feel like I always have to have my A game on. And is that exceptionalism? I think that sometimes comes with being minorities, where it feels like we have to be perfect in order to be accepted for our books, to be enjoyed. This has been happening in the industry. There is still that sort of sense or argument that has been used historically as to diverse books not selling, or the difficulty that they have in selling those kinds of books, because if certain readers can't see themselves represented, they're not interested, they're not going to buy it, even though my whole existence has been reading books where I have not been represented, and I've bought it and I've read it and I've enjoyed it. Yeah. So it's a very flawed argument, but it is there. So then in seeing this sort of new wave of authors that are coming out in these new books and these stories, I sort of get palpitations, because I'm like, okay, what if they don't do well? It just feels like, will it now strengthen that argument for some people in some people's eyes? And it's these pressures that I'm pretty sure other writers don't think about. And having to calm that anxiety, calm those voices. And I'm lucky I'm surrounded by people who can kind of talk me through that. But it does feel like I wish I didn't have to even worry or have those thoughts in my head. But I think definitely that there is an added responsibility, there are added pressures that come with entering this industry when we look the way we do.
I agree. And I did a school visit the other day, and this kid asked me to teach him Chinese. He said, can you teach a class? I was like, oh, I learned a little bit like years ago, but my Chinese is rusty. And so sometimes it feels like I'm not like a real Chinese person because I can't speak Chinese. So there's a lot of cultural stuff that and I'm adopted, my parents are white. So sometimes it feels like I'm not authentic enough. But I think my thing is just write a good story, like that kids will be hooked on. The Tiger Warrior and the Dragon King is like the main baddie that goes for the series. I think has hooked a lot of the readers in my daughter's class, because they're like, that's the best book I've ever read. And some of them couldn't read Danny Chung, it was too long for them. But for Tiger Warrior, they're like, when's the next one coming out? But I do worry about like cultural things. And I even had 2 British Chinese people sensitivity read Danny Chung just to make sure that I got it right. So there is this always worry that I'm getting it wrong as well. And the worry, you know, before Danny Chung came out, I was like, no one's going to buy this book, no one's going to read it. There's not been anything before like this, so no one's going to, you know, I was kind of anxious about it. And so yeah, there's this kind of extra layer. You're an author, but there's an extra layer of kind of worry. And when I read Dave Pigeon like a few years ago with my daughter, I just remember seeing it on Twitter and just like, oh, I love that Swapna's had the freedom to write about pigeons, because I do feel like a lot of writers of colour are pigeonholed. Are kind of, you know, there's some agents that won't accept books where animals talk. What if I want to write about a stick insect or something? You know, I don't always want to write about Chinese people. I might want to write about a flea or something, you know. So there's always this worry that what you write is policed, and I've heard stories of other people that where they have been policed. So again, that's an extra thing to think about and worry about, I guess.
I think when I first started, one of the first, before I was even published, one of the first things I was told by an editor is, you know, kind of basically, essentially stick to chapatis and saris, which I don't mind writing about. And those are things that I love. But also in saying that, it made me feel like, well, that's not, I don't want to only write those things. Plus there are people out there who, you know, write about forced marriage and, you know, honor killings way better than I ever could anyway. So I wanted to be a brown author that was able to just write stories regardless of what characters are. And there's this brilliant sort of new, I don't know whether it's like a new sort of catchphrase or whatever, called casual inclusivity, and that's what I love. I want to represent people that look like me in my books, but I don't want the books to be entirely about Indian culture.
That's it.
I want it to be okay for a brown girl to do ballet and fail at it and pick herself up with the help of 4 bunnies. I want that to be the story without it being about whether, you know, she had the right chupples on that day. You know, it's really important to me that, so I really like the phrase casual inclusivity.
I've heard sort of organic representation,
and
so all of these things natural. Right,
we're normalizing, like, you know, characters of color in the world that we actually live in. You know, Millie's not having to deal with arranged marriages, you know, she's just having to find the right ballet shoes that day. You know, that's what I want to write about. So
and when you state it, like, it's really not complicated, is it? It's really not, it's not hard. No, I find, I don't know, I'm not saying I have these conversations often, I'm not having these conversations often, but just having the space and freedom just to tell the stories that any author would get to tell, you know. And so that can be fairies, and it can be like dragon warriors, and it can be ballet bunnies, and it can be a girl with psychokinetic, you know, like, because if you just give us the space to tell the stories, like, that's going to pay dividends, right? Because look at the sort of richness, and our lived experiences do give us a unique point of view, you know, but it doesn't mean the story needs to be about our ethnicity.
I mean, if it's generally, I think just the way it's been going, to see, I mean, just from the books that we have here from everybody, just to see it keep going in that direction, but to also see it get the support that it deserves and not feel like an afterthought for the industry would be phenomenal.